Apple has definite rules about what its workers can say about the organization and their collaborators. This standard applies regardless of whether the worker doesn't distinguish themselves as Apple representatives. For instance, no representative can discuss another worker without consent from the representative involved. Employees can't expound on Apple on online journals or sites, regardless of whether it has a place within or Apple, or remark on bits of gossip about Apple any place on the web. Regardless of whether it is only their own opinion, the rules reach out to representatives who distinguish themselves as Apple's representatives via web-based media. Apple says they need to carry on in socially worthy manner since Apple will go to any length to prevent its employees from spilling confidential information even if means separating them from the public. This was what happened in 2012. When it built an exclusive restaurant for employees at its former headquarters in Cupertino, California. Apple had a restaurant inside its Cupertino office at the time. However, it was open to visitors on the condition they were with an employee. As it turned out, the presence of an employee was not enough to dissuade Apple's fears that rival businesses and journalists may visit to eavesdrop on conversations. So it built a second restaurant to exclusively serve its employees. 11. Each Apple worker is needed to consent to a non-revelation arrangement, simply like representatives at each other significant tech organization out there. Notwithstanding, Apple got into the news for some unacceptable reasons a couple of years back when it approached outsider engineers building applications for the App Store to sign non-divulgence agreements. Apple had recently opened the App Store to outsider designers at that point, and it was concerned they may release private insider facts that might be useful to its rivals. The agreement prohibited designers from unveiling the subtleties of the applications they were dealing with, or regardless of whether their application was dismissed from the store. The contract was questionable at the time in light of the fact that the engineers were not Apple representatives and enjoyed telling their locale about their most recent undertaking. Apple developed the iPad in one of the windowless lockdown rooms we talked about in the previous entry. According to a developer who wrote code for the iPad, he was the sixth person to touch the unreleased iPad and one of the 4 people allowed into the lockdown room containing the prototype iPads. Apple built frames round the tablets so the developers could not see what they looked like. They could not move the tablets either because Apple secured them to the table with bicycle chains. Apple took photos of every part of the table containing an iPad so they could trace leaked pictures by comparing the patterns of the wood grains. The developer added that Apple took down the names and social security numbers of everyone working in the room. They were explicitly forbidden from talking to anyone about the iPad. That includes their boss and wife. On the off chance that you think Apple is severe with its providers and contractual workers, stand by until you know how it treats its own representatives. Like temporary workers, most Apple representatives are uninformed about Apple's unreleased items. They are just determined what they need to know when they need to know it. Every worker realizes something is in progress when they see a woodworker stroll into their office. Nonetheless, with regards to Apple's arrangements, they don't pose inquiries since they realize somebody would have addressed them on the off chance that it were their business. The woodworkers before long set up or steer rooms that are simply open to approved staff. Apple calls these rooms lockdown rooms. They are the origin of most items and administrations created by Apple. Employees outside an office possibly find the presence of a lockdown room when their entrance identifications quit conceding them admittance to specific rooms and workplaces. The rest don't have the foggiest idea what's going on, and frequently as astounded as we are when Apple out of nowhere delivers another product. 8. Apple has an extensive rundown of things it could do to providers and contractual workers that release its unreleased items. It could fine them, record charges, or in extraordinary cases, end their agreement, regardless of whether it just presumes them of being liable for the leak. This has made numerous Apple temporary workers like Foxconn, which amasses iPhones, to transform their offices into current fortifications. Foxconn representatives can just access the plant with security cards, after which watchers cross-check their personality with unique mark scanners. Watchers additionally utilize metal locators to look through them before they leave the facility. Apple's temporary workers pay attention to their security so that monitors at a Foxconn manufacturing plant in Longhua, China, beat up and bothered a Reuters journalist for taking photographs of the office from the road. The badgering possibly finished where the correspondent called the police. The journalist understood an expression of remorse was all he would get after a cop advised him, "You are allowed to do what you need, however this is Foxconn and they have an exceptional status here." The correspondent didn't record charges. 7. Apple's various providers are its most fragile connections. Their workers are scandalous for releasing unreleased items to the press. One of Apple's most noticeably awful holes happened a couple of years back when a worker of a Chinese provider called Jabal took a large number of housings of the unreleased iPhone 5C and spilled it to the press. Apple reacted by amassing a group of previous American troopers and insight specialists to screen its Chinese providers. It considered in the new Product Security Team (NPS). Each individual from the group got Chinese, so language was no barrier. The new Product Security Team had unhindered admittance to providers' manufacturing plants where they inspected their inventories and checked the rubbish to affirm no material was absent. The group was to a great extent effective. On one event, they even got a few laborers who had burrowed a passage to pirate Apple's items out of the processing plant of an anonymous supplier. 6. Apple utilizes code names for every one of its models and unreleased items. That way, nobody will have a thought of what the item is about regardless of whether the code name leaked. For model, the Apple Watch was code-named Gizmo, Mac OS was code-named Systems, and the iPhone was code-named Purple. The iPhone was created in a devoted, lockdown room. We will return to this soon. Code-named the Purple Residence. Representatives working there clung to severe principles like failing to talk about the model iPhone outside the room. The 1994 Power Macintosh 7100 PC was codenamed after stargazer Carl Sagan, who was unmoved when he discovered. Apple reacted by renaming it Butt-Headed Astronomer. Sagan documented charges, first against the Butt-Headed Astronomer codename and later, the Carl Sagan codename. He lost both. He and Apple later agreed to codename the PC Law, which implies lawyers are wimps. The disputable naming show was reached out to the Mac OS 7.5. which was additionally scheduled for discharge in 1994. It was initially codenamed Mozart, however changed to Capone after Apple found Windows had codenamed its impending Windows 95, Chicago. Apple's name was a quip on the scandalous Al Capone, who once managed over the Chicago wrongdoing scene. 5. A couple of years prior, a sapphire glass maker called GT Advanced failed the organization before long recorded charges against Apple in the midst of cases of $50 million fine Apple forced on it added to its downfall. We don't have the foggiest idea about the express subtleties of the fine in light of the fact that the two organizations consented to a non-revelation arrangement. In any case, from the restricted subtleties GT's lawyers introduced in court, we realize Apple fined the organization for spilling data about the unreleased iPhone 6. GT's legal counselors portray the arrangement among Apple and GT as harsh and burdensome. According to reports, Apple consistently fines its providers for spills followed back to their officers. The providers can't decline to pay since it is important for the conditions recorded in their contracts. 3. Apple and GT later consented to a $3.5 million settlement. 4. Apple's employees are fond of leaking company information to the press. This trend is so common that a memo warning employees against leaking company information to the press was leaked to the press. The details of another meeting where executives deliberated on how to catch leakers was leaked to. 1. In response, Apple puts great efforts into exposing leakers. It even contracted the services of digital forensic companies like Global Security to trace leaked company documents back to the source. So far, Global Security has exposed several Apple employees who leaked information about unreleased products to the press. It also works with Apple's suppliers to track leakers along with those who gained unauthorized entry into restricted areas or stole patents, prototypes and completed products. 2.